My name is Rowan Vance. I'm 33 years old, and by the time I was 26, I had quietly restructured the debt portfolio of a mid-sized Austin real estate firm that 3 senior analysts said was unsalvageable. I didn't announce it. I didn't post it. I just did the work, submitted the report, and walked back to my desk while my managing director stared at the numbers, like they were written in a language he hadn't invented. That's always been my way. I don't perform competence. I practice it. But tonight, standing in the lobby of the Fairmont Austin, holding a glass of sparkling water I haven't touched, wearing a charcoal suit, I pressed myself at 6 this morning. I am not thinking about debt restructuring or yield curves or distressed asset ratios. I am thinking about a rooftop, a deposit receipt, and a phone call I received 9 years ago that lasted 4 minutes and 22 seconds, during which my mother used the word stable. Like it was an apology she didn't mean to give. The Fairmont lobby smells like cedar and expensive candles. The kind of scent they pump through the ventilation system on purpose, designed by some hospitality consultant to make guests feel like money is a natural state of being. I know this because I read the contract proposal when the hotel's parent company refinanced their Austin properties in 2021. I was the analyst who flagged 3 irregularities in their amortization schedule. They fixed them. They never knew my name. That's also always been my way. Around me, the Texas Financial Planning Summit's opening mixer is in full effect. 200 professionals, wealth managers, portfolio directors, independent analysts, a handful of venture-backed fintech founders who still think disruption is a personality trait. The room hums with the specific frequency of ambitious people performing relaxation. Firm handshakes, practiced laughs, business cards exchanged with 2 hands like they're sacred documents. I belong here. More than most people in this room, actually. But belonging has never been the point for me. Understanding has. And right now, what I understand. What I have understood with the cold, precise clarity of a man who spent 9 years turning other people's financial disasters into structured opportunity, is that tomorrow morning, a property on Barton Hills Drive in Austin, Texas, is going to appear in a private bank auction listing. A specific property. A property I know better than the bank does. Better than the current occupants do. I know its square footage, its foundation repair history, the 2019 HVAC replacement that was financed at an unfavorable rate, and the exact figure of the lien that's been accumulating interest since Rowan Vance, my mother, co-signed a business loan for my sister, Chloe's 3rd failed venture without telling anyone, including, apparently, her own accountant. I know all of this because I am very good at my job. And because 9 years ago, on the night of my 24th birthday, I learned something that no financial model had ever taught me. The people most likely to drain your resources are the ones who have already decided you exist to be drained. Let me take you back. Not with bitterness. I want to be clear about that. What I feel right now, standing in this lobby, is not bitterness. Bitterness is a leak. It costs you more than it costs anyone else. What I feel is something closer to the quiet satisfaction of a man who ran the numbers, waited for the market to correct, and positioned himself accordingly. But you need to understand where the position started. I grew up in Austin, in a house on Barton Hills Drive that my father bought in 1991, when the neighborhood was still undervalued. He had decent instincts about real estate. My father, terrible instincts about everything else. But the house, that he got right. 4 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, a backyard with a live oak tree that was already 60 years old when we moved in. The kind of house that appreciated quietly and consistently, while the family inside it did the opposite. My father left when I was 11. Not dramatically. He just reduced his presence over about 18 months until one morning he wasn't there. And my mother explained his absence the way she explained most inconvenient truths. Briefly, and in a way that made it clear the topic was now closed. What remained was Rowan Vance, my sister Chloe, who was 8 at the time, and me, and the arithmetic started almost immediately. Eleanor worked in event coordination, corporate galas, charity fundraisers, the kind of high-visibility social functions where she could wear a headset and feel essential. She was good at it. She understood how rooms were supposed to feel, how people were supposed to move through spaces, What details made wealthy clients believe they were being taken care of? What she was less good at was applying any of that precision to her own finances, or to the emotional architecture of raising two children with fundamentally different needs. Chloe needed visible investment. Attention, intervention, presence. She cried easily and loudly, and Eleanor responded to that the way most people respond to a fire alarm. Immediately, completely, without stopping to assess whether the building is actually burning. Chloe's tears were infrastructure. They built entire systems around themselves. I did not cry easily. I solved problems. By 13, I was managing our household's bill payment schedule on a spreadsheet. I built myself because I'd noticed Eleanor was incurring late fees on 3 recurring accounts. She thanked me once, briefly, and then began referring to it as Rowan's little system, in a tone that suggested it was a hobby rather than a function. That was the first entry in a ledger I didn't know I was keeping. If you've ever been the responsible one in a family, the one who handles things quietly while someone else gets the credit for existing, drop a comment below. Because what I'm about to describe is going to feel uncomfortably familiar. By the time I was 22, I had a financial analysis degree from UT Austin, paid for through a combination of academic scholarships, a part-time position at a downtown investment firm, and 18 months of weekend work, doing freelance bookkeeping for small businesses. Eleanor had attended my graduation. She'd worn a yellow dress and told her friends in the parking lot that I'd always been the serious one, in a tone that made seriousness sound like a mild deficiency. Chloe had not attended. She'd had a brand activation event for her first business, a curated lifestyle subscription box, that fell on the same weekend. Eleanor had helped her set up the display tables. I noted this, filed it, moved on. At 23, I joined a mid-tier financial consulting firm in downtown Austin, entry-level, but the work was serious. Distressed debt analysis, portfolio risk assessment, identifying undervalued assets in markets where emotion had caused mispricing. I was good at it the way some people are good at languages. Not because I studied harder, but because the underlying logic felt native to me. Numbers don't perform. They don't have anxious episodes or need safety nets. They just tell you what is true, and then they wait for you to act accordingly. By 24, I had saved $5,000. Not a fortune, but for a second-year analyst still paying off the last of his incidentals, it was significant. It was the first money I had ever saved that was entirely mine. Not earmarked, not allocated, not quietly redirected towards someone else's emergency. I decided to use it for one night. One proper, intentional celebration of the fact that I had survived, built something, and was starting to become the person I'd been working toward. Since I was 13 years old running bill payments on a spreadsheet, I booked the rooftop terrace at a premium venue in East Austin. 12 guests, colleagues, a few university friends, 2 mentors from my firm, a catered dinner. Nothing extravagant by the standards of the people I was beginning to work alongside, but extraordinary by the standards of where I'd come from. I paid the $5, $0 deposit on a Tuesday. The event was that Friday, on Friday afternoon, at 4:47 p.m., 3 hours and 13 minutes before my guests were scheduled to arrive. My mother called 4 minutes and 22 seconds. I know because I still have the call log. Financial analysts keep records. It's occupational. She didn't ask how I was. She opened with Chloe's in crisis. The boutique funding for Chloe's second business, a curated fashion resale platform, had fallen through that morning. Chloe had posted about it on Instagram. Not a private story, a public post. Tears, shaking hands, language about her mental health that used clinical terminology loosely enough to imply diagnosis without stating one. The post had gotten significant engagement. Eleanor had decided this constituted an emergency of the highest order. She needed me to cancel the venue. She needed the deposit refunded, or absorbed if it wasn't refundable, and she needed me to transfer what remained of my savings to Chloe's business account to cover the gap in her launch budget. I said, "Mom, it's my birthday," she said. "You're the stable one, Rowan. Chloe needs the safety net." There it was. Not an argument, not a negotiation, a categorization. I was stable. Chloe needed safety, therefore the transfer was logical. The math was simple. If you accepted the premise that my stability existed as a resource for someone else's instability, rather than as the result of choices I had made sacrifices I had structured, a life I had been quietly and deliberately constructing while no one was paying attention. I did not shout. My jaw tightened. I felt my grip on the phone adjust. Not squeezing, just recalibrating. The way you recalibrate a position when the underlying data changes, I said. I'll call you back. I called the venue. The deposit was non-refundable. I absorbed it. I texted my 12 guests a cancellation. 3 of them replied immediately, genuinely concerned. I told them something came up. Then I went to my bank's mobile app and I looked at the transfer screen for a long time. And in those minutes, standing in my apartment kitchen, the Austin skyline going gold outside my window, wearing the shirt I'd ironed for a birthday dinner that no longer existed, I made 2 decisions. The first decision was the transfer. I made it. Because I was 24 and I still believed, somewhere beneath the arithmetic, that being needed meant being loved. The second decision was quieter. It had no immediate action attached to it. It was simply this. I was done being infrastructure. I packed a bag that night. I called my firm's HR department the next morning and arranged to work remotely while I found a new apartment. I did not call Eleanor. I did not explain. I simply, like my father before me, though for entirely different reasons, reduced my presence until it became absence. The difference between him and me is that I had a plan, and I had 9 years to run it. 9 years is a long time to be invisible to the people who raised you. It is also, as it turns out, an extraordinary amount of time to build something. I want you to understand what those 9 years actually looked like. Not the highlight reel, not the LinkedIn version, but the real texture of them. The 5:47 a.m. alarms. The instant coffee in a second-hand mug, because I had allocated my discretionary budget to a Bloomberg terminal subscription that cost more per month than my first apartment's electricity bill. The legal pads filled with property comps and debt schedules that covered my kitchen table on weekends, while other 20-somethings were at rooftop bars. I was at a rooftop once. I paid $5,000 for it. You know how that ended. After I left Barton Hills Drive, after I packed that single bag and arranged remote work and found a studio apartment in East Austin that smelled like fresh paint and previous tenant decisions, I made a rule for myself. One rule, simple enough to fit on an index card, which is exactly where I wrote it and taped it to my bathroom mirror. Do not spend energy on people who have already decided what you're worth. That was it. Not a motivational poster, not a vision board, just a single operational principle. The way a good financial model has a single governing assumption that everything else builds on. Eleanor called twice in the first month. I let both calls go to voicemail. She left messages that were, and I say this as a professional who says this for a living, masterfully constructed. The first was warm, concerned. Rowan, honey. I just want to make sure you're okay. The second, 3 weeks later, had shifted register entirely. Clipped, slightly wounded. I don't know what you think happened, but this family doesn't just disappear on each other. I noted. The framing, this family doesn't just disappear. As if I were the one with a pattern of vanishing. I saved both voicemails in a folder on my phone labeled Reference. Financial analysts keep records. I've mentioned that. Chloe sent a text 8 weeks in one line. Mom says you're being dramatic. Hope you're okay, I guess. No punctuation on the last sentence. I read it twice, put my phone face down on my desk, and went back to the distressed asset report. I was building for a strip mall portfolio in San Marcos. I did not respond. If you've ever gone no contact, even partial no contact, with family members who treated your silence as aggression and your boundaries as abandonment, you know exactly what that text felt like. Drop a comment. You are not alone in this. Here is what I did instead of responding. I worked specifically. I began studying Texas real estate law with the focused intensity of someone who has identified a long-term opportunity and intends to be positioned for it before the market catches up. This wasn't random. In my first year of financial consulting, I'd noticed something in the distressed debt portfolios I was analyzing. The properties with the most reliable recovery value weren't commercial real estate or new developments. They were established residential properties in appreciating neighborhoods that had been allowed to accumulate debt through mismanagement rather than structural failure. In other words, good houses owned by people who were bad with money. I knew one of those houses personally. I wasn't ready to move on it. Not yet. I was 24, undercapitalized, and still learning. But I began building the knowledge base. I took a real estate licensing course on weekends, not to sell properties, but to understand the legal mechanics of how they transferred hands. I studied auction law. I read FDIC guidelines on asset disposition. I learned the precise sequence of events that occurs when a lender initiates foreclosure proceedings in Travis County, the notice timelines, the redemption period windows, the auction registration requirements, the bidding protocols. I learned it the way I learned everything, thoroughly, quietly, and with specific intent. Meanwhile, my career moved. By 25, I had been promoted to senior analyst. By 26, I had restructured that debt portfolio, the one I mentioned in the Fairmont lobby, and my managing director had begun routing the firm's most complex distressed asset cases to my desk specifically. By 27, I had built enough of a track record to approach 2 private equity contacts about a side arrangement. I would identify undervalued, distressed residential properties. They would co-invest. I would manage the acquisition and recovery process, and we would split the returns on a structured schedule. The first property netted $41,000 over 14 months. The second netted $68,000. By the third, my equity partners were asking me to scale the model. I kept my apartment small. I kept my expenses lean. Every dollar I didn't spend on lifestyle went into a separate account I had labeled with the specific dark humor of a man who had once ironed a shirt for a canceled birthday dinner, the position. I want to be precise about something here, because precision matters to me, and I think it should matter to you too, when you're evaluating what I did and whether it was justified. I was not sitting in a dark room for 9 years, fantasizing about revenge. I was building a life, a real one, with professional respect I had earned, financial security I had constructed from scratch, and a sense of self that did not require anyone's validation to remain intact. The Barton Hills property was not my obsession. It was a line item. One specific asset in an appreciating market with a predictable debt trajectory, owned by people whose financial behavior I understood with clinical accuracy, because I had watched it develop in real time for the first 24 years of my life. Eleanor had never been good with money. She earned reasonably well from her event coordination work, but she spent with the conviction of someone who believed income was a permanent condition rather than a variable. When my father left, he took his salary and left her with a mortgage she could manage, and expenses she couldn't quite prioritize. She refinanced twice in the years after he left. I know this from public records, which I began checking periodically around. Year 3, the way you check a position you're monitoring but not yet ready to enter. Chloe's businesses were the accelerant. There were 3 of them over 9 years. The subscription box, the fashion resale platform, the one whose collapse had consumed my birthday savings. And then, in year 6, a luxury wellness content studio that Chloe had convinced Eleanor to partially fund by co-signing a $340, zero business loan through a private lender at an interest rate that made my jaw tighten when I pulled the filing. 11.4%. Variable. With a balloon payment structure, I pulled that filing on a Tuesday evening, sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of water and a legal pad, and I sat with the number for a long time. Not because I was surprised. I had stopped being surprised by the financial decisions in that household around year 2. I sat with it because 11.4% variable on a $340,000 note attached to a wellness content studio with no demonstrable revenue model, secured in part against a residential property that was already carrying a refinanced mortgage balance. That was not a business loan. That was a countdown timer. I wrote the maturity date on my legal pad, circled it. Then I opened a new tab and looked up current auction registration procedures for Travis County. The timing was going to work. My cousin, Dana, the one family member I had stayed loosely in contact with, because Dana had the rare quality of reporting information accurately, without editorializing, called me in year 7 to let me know that Eleanor had stopped mentioning me in family gatherings. She tells people you moved away for work, Dana said. That's the version now. I asked Dana how the house looked. Needs work, she said. The gutters are bad. I think the back fence finally gave. Your mom doesn't really. She doesn't spend money on maintenance stuff anymore. Deferred maintenance. On top of the mortgage balance. On top of the business loan lien. I thanked Dana and ended the call. Then 8 months ago, Dana sent me a screenshot of a group chat message. The family thread, the one I had been quietly removed from sometime around year 2, which I had also noted and filed. Eleanor had written in the flat declarative tone of someone making an announcement, rather than asking a question. We may need to file bankruptcy. The lender is moving on the loan. Chloe is devastated. Rowan will cover the debt. He has no family of his own to feed. He owes us this. I read that message 4 times. He owes us this. I set my phone down on my desk, slowly. The way you set down something fragile, not because you care about the object, but because you care about your own composure. I breathed. I looked at the Austin skyline outside my office window, which was considerably higher up than the East Austin studio window I'd looked out of 9 years ago. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the Travis County property records for Barton Hills Drive. The lender had filed the notice of default 6 weeks prior. The auction date had been set. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. Not to help them. Not to cover the debt. Not to be the safety net one more time. To register as a bidder. The auction was scheduled for a Thursday. I know the exact date, the exact time, the exact room number in the Travis County Administrative Building, where it was going to be held. Because I had been tracking this filing the way I track every asset I intend to acquire, with a dedicated folder, a timeline spreadsheet, and a set of calendar alerts going back 4 months. The first alert was labeled Default Notice Filed. The second, Redemption Window Closes. The third, set for the morning of the auction itself, said simply, Today, I am telling you this because I want you to understand something about the nature of preparation. People watch someone execute a plan, and they call it revenge. What they are actually watching is the result of a person who decided, quietly, without announcement, without the performance of anger, that they were going to stop absorbing losses and start building positions. There is a difference. Revenge is emotional. What I did was structural. But I am getting ahead of myself, because before the Thursday of the auction, there was a Wednesday, and Wednesday is where the breaking point actually lives. Not in the dramatic public moment, but in the quiet one. The one nobody films. The one that happens in an ordinary room, when an ordinary piece of information lands with the weight of a confirmed diagnosis. You already suspected. Let me tell you about that Wednesday. I was in my office on the 14th floor of a building on Congress Avenue. Floor-to-ceiling windows, the Texas state capitol visible to the north if you stood at the right angle. I had built this, the office, the view, the title on the door, from a studio apartment and a Bloomberg subscription, and 9 years of 5:47 a.m. alarms. I want you to hold that image, the view from that window. Because what I am about to tell you happened while I was standing in front of it, coffee in hand, looking at a city I had rebuilt myself inside of. Donna called at 9:14 a.m. She didn't open with a greeting. She said, Rowan. I said, tell me. Here is what had happened. Eleanor, in the process of trying to understand why the bank's auction listing had appeared without her being able to stop it, had hired a property attorney for a single consultation. That attorney had done what any competent property attorney does, pulled the full public record on the asset, which included, in the chain of registered interested parties, a bidder registration filed 11 days prior, under the name Rowan Vance. Eleanor had seen my name on that document. Donna told me that Eleanor's response, and she was careful here, because Dana is accurate, was not grief. It was not the complicated sadness of a mother, realizing the magnitude of what she had done to her son. It was calculation, immediate, operational calculation. Eleanor had called a family meeting that same evening. Dana had been peripherally included because she lived nearby. She had sat in the living room of the Barton Hills house, my father's house, the house with the 60-year-old live oak in the backyard, and listened to Eleanor outline a strategy. The strategy was this. Eleanor would call me. She would not mention that she had seen my name on the filing. She would call as a mother, warm, tired, humbled. She would tell me that things had gotten difficult, that she was scared, that she had made mistakes. She would ask me, not for money this time, but for advice, financial advice, from her son, the financial analyst. She would use the call to find out how far along my involvement was, whether I was acting alone or with partners, and whether there was still a path to blocking the auction or negotiating a private transfer that kept the property out of my hands. She wants to use the call to do opposition research on you, Dana said. I'm not exaggerating. Those were almost her exact words, she said. I just need to know what he knows. I was quiet for a moment. Outside my window, Austin was doing what Austin does on a weekday morning, moving, building, expanding, generating the whole relentless machine of a city that rewards people who position themselves correctly and shows no particular mercy to those who don't. What did Chloe say? I asked. Donna paused. Chloe said, You always thought you were better than everyone, and this proves it. I set my coffee down on the windowsill. My hand was steady. I want to be specific about that. My hand was completely steady, which surprised me in the moment, because what I was feeling was not calm. What I was feeling was something I had not had a precise word for until that morning standing at that window. It was recognition, not anger, not hurt, not the particular exhausted grief of a person who still, somewhere wanted things to have been different. Recognition. The clean, clarifying sensation of a variable you have been modeling theoretically for 9 years, finally resolving into a confirmed value. I had spent 9 years wondering, at some low frequency beneath all the work and all the building and all the early mornings, whether I had misread them. Whether the phone call on my 24th birthday had been a terrible moment rather than a defining one. Whether Eleanor had some private accounting of what she'd taken from me that she carried with her. Some awareness that she didn't voice, but that existed quietly as understanding, the family meeting. The opposition research. I just need to know what he knows. There was no private accounting. There never had been. I was not a son to be considered. I was a resource to be managed. And when the resource stopped being manageable, the response was not reflection. It was tactics. If you have ever had the moment, the specific crystallizing moment, where you stopped, hoping someone would change, and simply accepted what they had always been, you know what I felt standing at that window. It does not feel like anger. It feels like stillness. Drop a comment if you have been there. I did not call Eleanor back that day, or the next. What I did instead was methodical. I called my attorney and confirmed that my bidder registration was fully compliant and could not be challenged on procedural grounds. I called my bank and verified the cashier's check arrangement for the auction amount, a figure I had calculated to the precise dollar based on the outstanding lien balance, the estimated competing bid range for a property of that type in that neighborhood, and a 15% buffer I had built in for emotional pain from any party who might show up with personal stakes in the outcome. I was not going to lose this auction because I had underprepared. I had not underprepared anything in 9 years. Then I did something I had not done since I left. I drove to Barton Hills Drive, not to the house. I parked 2 blocks away, where the street curved, and you could see the roof line and the top of the live oak without being visible from the front windows. I sat in my car for 11 minutes. I know, because I looked at the clock when I arrived, and again when I left. The gutters were bad. Dana had been right about that. The front garden that my father had apparently maintained with some consistency in the years before he left had gone neutral. Not overgrown, but untended. The kind of lawn that says the people inside are managing, not living. The fence along the right side of the property was newer than the rest, which suggested a specific repair rather than general upkeep. The driveway had a crack running from the garage door to the street that had not been filled. Deferred maintenance compounds. Every year you don't fix a gutter, the fascia behind it degrades. Every year you don't seal a driveway crack, water infiltrates the subbase. I had listed this property's deferred maintenance in my acquisition file as a liability, one that I had already budgeted for in my post-acquisition cost model. I was looking at my childhood home through a due diligence lens and feeling nothing except the professional interest of a man, evaluating an asset he is about to own. That was when I understood that I was genuinely free. Not free because I had won something. Not free because I was about to take something back. Free because the house at the end of that street, the house with the live oak and the original hardwood floors and the crack in the driveway, had stopped being the place I came from and become simply a property in Travis County with a clear acquisition path and a strong recovery value. The grief had finished. I had not noticed it finishing. But sitting in that car, looking at that roofline, I realized I had been bracing for something. Some residual pull, some last argument the past wanted to make. And it wasn't there. There was only the work. There was only the position. I drove back to my office. The auction was tomorrow. I had one more thing to prepare. Not financial. I had been financially ready for months. What I needed to prepare was simpler and, in some ways, harder. I needed to decide, with precision, what I was going to say when I walked up to that door with the ownership papers in my hand. Because Eleanor was going to cry. I knew that. Chloe was going to perform a panic episode. The shaking hands, the breathing, the clinical language deployed without clinical basis. I knew that too. What I needed was a sentence. One clean, load-bearing sentence that said everything. I had never said in 4 minutes and 22 seconds on a Friday afternoon 9 years ago. I sat at my desk until 11 p.m., going through options the way I go through financial models, testing each one against the variables, checking for weaknesses, eliminating the ones that were too long or too emotional or too much about the past rather than the present reality. By 11, I had it 6 words with one dependent clause. Precise, non-negotiable. And in the morning, I was going to deliver it with the same composure I had used at 24, when I said I'll call you back, and then built an entirely different life instead. I shut my laptop. I set my alarm for 5:47 a.m. I had one more position to close. The auction room in the Travis County Administrative Building smells like government buildings everywhere. Recycled air, old carpet, the faint chemical trace of cleaning products, applied to surfaces that have absorbed decades of difficult transactions. Foreclosures, estates, disputes resolved not by conversation, but by the orderly process of law, transferring ownership from one name to another. I arrived 20 minutes early. Dark navy suit, no tie. The cashier's check was in the interior pocket of my jacket, folded once inside a plain white envelope. I had checked the amount 3 times the night before, and once more. At 6 a.m., standing at my kitchen counter with coffee I didn't taste. There were 4 other registered bidders in the room. 2 were clearly investors. The particular body language of people who do this regularly, relaxed in their chairs, phones out, treating this the way I treat most auctions, as a transaction, not an event. One was a younger man, with a contractor's calluses on his hands, who was probably looking at the property as a flip. The 4th was a woman from a property management firm, whose card I recognized from a deal I had analyzed 2 years prior. None of them knew what this property was to me. To them, it was a line item. A Barton Hills residential 4-bed established lot, deferred maintenance, motivated seller situation. Clean acquisition if you knew what you were buying. I knew exactly what I was buying. Eleanor and Chloe were not in the room. I had not expected them to be. The auction process does not require the former owner's presence, and Eleanor would not have wanted to watch. She would be waiting. At the house, probably. In the living room she had organized and reorganized over 30 years, surrounded by the accumulated evidence of a life that had been, by any honest measure, more supported by me than she had ever acknowledged. The auction itself took 11 minutes. The bidding opened at the reserve. The contractor dropped out early. The number moved past what made sense for a flip. One of the investors stayed in through 2 increments, then recalculated and sat back. The property management woman went 2 rounds. Beyond that I let her. I watched her do the math in real time. The expression of someone running yield calculations against a rising acquisition cost. And I waited until she had made her decision before I placed the final bid. Cash. Full amount. No financing contingency, the auctioneer confirmed. Recorded. Stamped the property at Barton Hills Drive, Austin, Texas. The house my father bought in 1991. The house with the 60-year-old live oak in the backyard. The house I had left with a single bag, 9 years ago, wearing a shirt ironed for a birthday dinner that never happened. Transferred into my name at 10:23 a.m. on a Thursday morning. I shook the auctioneer's hand, collected my documentation, walked to the elevator. In the lobby, I stood still for exactly 1 minute, not for drama, because I had been in motion for 9 years, and I wanted to give myself 60 seconds to register what stillness felt like before I drove to Barton Hills Drive. I want to pause here and tell you something directly. Not as Rowan, but as someone who has spent a long time thinking about what this story actually means. We grow up being told that family is unconditional, that love means absorbing, enduring, returning, and for some families, that is genuinely true. But there is a version of that story that gets used as a weapon, where unconditional means one person's conditions are simply never acknowledged, where the strong one exists to subsidize the fragile one indefinitely, without audit, without reciprocity, without end. The psychological term for what Rowan experienced is parentification. Being assigned an adult role of financial and emotional provider inside a family system that never intended to balance the ledger. Research consistently shows that people in this position don't just lose money or time. They lose the developmental experience of being cared for, of having their needs treated as legitimate, of existing in a family as a person rather than a function. Walking away from that system is not cruelty. It is the most honest thing a person can do, for themselves and ultimately for the people they leave behind, who are forced, perhaps for the first time, to encounter the actual cost of what they built their lives on. This is what it looks like when someone finally lets the arithmetic speak. I parked in the driveway, not 2 blocks away this time, in the driveway. My driveway. The crack running from the garage door to the street caught the morning light and I made a mental note. Epoxy injection filler, $40 in materials, 2 hours of labor. I would handle it the first weekend. I walked to the front door and knocked. Eleanor opened it in under 10 seconds, which told me she had been watching from the window. She was wearing a silk blouse I recognized from a fundraising event, photo Dana had sent me 3 years ago. She had dressed for this. The presentation was immediate and polished. A version of herself she had constructed for maximum effect. Her eyes went to the envelope in my hand. Rowan. Her voice was calibrated. Warm but fractured at the edges. The specific vocal texture of someone performing vulnerability while maintaining structural control. I'm so glad you came. I've been wanting to talk to you for so long. I've made mistakes, I know that. And Mom, I said it quietly, not unkindly. The way you say a word when you need someone to stop so you can say the one that matters. She stopped. I held up the envelope. This is the new deed. Travis County recorded it at 10:23 this morning. The property transferred to me at auction. I own this house. The performance shifted in real time. I watched it happen. The warmth recalibrating, the eyes sharpening, the jaw setting in the particular way of a person whose primary strategy has just been removed from the board. Behind her, in the hallway, I heard Chloe's footsteps on the original hardwood floor. Chloe appeared in the doorway. She looked at me with an expression that cycled through several options before landing on injured. Rowan, you can't do this. You know what this is going to do to Mom. I can't even breathe right now. Her hand went to her chest. The breathing changed. The whole familiar architecture of crisis assembled in under 30 seconds. I looked at her. Then I looked at Eleanor. You told a family group chat that I would clear your debt because I have no family of my own to feed, I said. You called me a safety net. You used that word 9 years ago when you took my savings and canceled my birthday. And you used it again 8 months ago when you assumed I would absorb your consequences one more time. Eleanor's chin lifted. You were always the strong one. I know. I said it without heat. That's what I want to talk to you about. I reached into the envelope and removed the ownership documents. Clean copies, properly certified. I held them, so both of them could see my name on the title line. Being strong is not the same as being available for extraction. Being stable is not the same as being a resource with no cost basis. You decided, before I was old enough to negotiate the terms, that I was infrastructure. That my function in this family was to absorb what Chloe couldn't carry and ask for nothing in return. And every time I tried to have something of my own, a savings account, a birthday dinner, a boundary, it became a problem to be managed. Chloe made a sound. I kept going. I did not come here to punish you. I came here because this is what the arithmetic actually looks like when someone finally runs it. Honestly, you borrowed against this house. You co-signed a loan you could not service. The bank moved on the asset. I was a registered bidder with a cashier's check and 9 years of preparation. That is the complete transaction. There is no version of this where I am the villain. Eleanor's eyes were wet now. Real tears. Possibly. It is genuinely difficult to distinguish, with Eleanor, between authentic emotion and the skilled deployment of its appearance. Either way, I felt neither guilt nor satisfaction. What I felt was the clean, neutral clarity of a man who has said the true thing at the correct time. You have 30 days, I said. That is the legal notice period, and I am honoring it exactly. I will not be extending it, and I will not be negotiating a rental arrangement. I have contractors scheduled for week 5. Rowan, please. Eleanor's voice broke on the second word. You told me I was the stable one, I said. You were right, I am. And the stable one is telling you that you have 30 days and a daughter who is 32 years old and has never been asked to be stable for anyone. Figure it out together. I handed Eleanor the eviction notice, properly filed, properly served, every procedural requirement met, because I had not come this far to lose on a technicality. Then I said the sentence I had built at my desk at 11 p.m. the night before, the one I had tested against every variable, the one I had been carrying in my chest since 5:47 a.m. You told me 9 years ago that you could only show up for one of us. On this paper, the state of Texas only shows up for the owner. Try and cancel this. I walked them to the gate, not cruelly. I did not touch either of them, did not raise my voice, did not perform triumph the way they had performed crisis. I simply walked behind them, the way you walk behind a process that has completed itself. And when they were on the sidewalk, I turned to the security panel by the gate post and entered the new code. The lock engaged with a clean, definitive click. I stood in my driveway for a moment. The live oak in the backyard was still visible over the roofline, 69 years old now. By my calculation, it had been here before my father bought the house. It would be here long after every decision made inside. It had been forgotten. I went inside and opened every window. Here is what I need you to take with you. And I mean this not as a speech, but as the thing I wish someone had told me at 24. Standing in a kitchen, wearing a shirt ironed for a dinner that was never going to happen. The moment you stop being a safety net and start being a person is not a betrayal. It is the most important transaction you will ever execute. In this country, we talk a lot about financial literacy, about credit scores and investment accounts and building generational wealth. But there is a form of financial illiteracy that nobody puts in textbooks, and it is this: not knowing your own value, not understanding that your time, your labor, your stability, your savings, these are assets, and assets that are given without contract, without reciprocity, without even acknowledgement, are not generosity. They are exploitation with a family discount. Blood makes you related. Boundaries make you free. The people who told you that you are the strong one were not complimenting you. They were assigning you a role that served their needs and cost you yours. True strength is not the ability to absorb indefinitely. True strength is the decision to stop absorbing and start building, even when the people who benefited from your absorption call that decision cruel. You are not a line item. You are not infrastructure. You are not the safety net. And if the table you've been sitting at has never once asked what you need, you are allowed to get up. If this story made you feel something you've been carrying alone for a long time, you are not alone. Leave a comment. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're part of the shadow drama stories, you already know. We don't just tell stories here. We tell the truth inside the stories that people are too afraid to say out loud. I'll see you in the next one.